All right, all right. Welcome to another Tuesday LinkedIn Live broadcast brought to you by A Place at Home. My name is Mitch Benson. I'm the Franchise Development Manager. I'm excited to be here with everyone here today. And I am joined by a man who's been in franchising for a while. I'm joined by a partner at Internicola Law Firm, where he helps emerging brands get the legal support they need, resources to grow, and strategies to win at franchising. He likes early sunrises and long walks on the beach. Please welcome Mr. Brian Lincer. How are you?
How's it going, Mitch?
It's
Thanks for
going
having me.
well. Well,
Good.
thanks for joining. Now, I understand you're going on like a speaking tour, right? You have another kind of speaking engagement on Thursday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's great. This is the new community. We get around digitally now. So this is the way we get to meet people, and I love to do it. So
Yeah.
thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being a big part of it. This is so exciting for us to, like you say, get to in front of our community, get a way to have our information across a lot of people. So we've had a lot of traction with our LinkedIn broadcasts here. Folks taking their lunch break with us, you know what I mean? Listening to what we have to say here. And it's been a lot of fun so far. And we and the team here at A Place at Home have taken a handful of runs at the document agreement legal portion of becoming a Place at Home franchisee, right? Years ago, Dustin went through every item of an FDD and just did like 5 minutes on each item, just high level what these things are, giving us some definitions there. Since then, Jared and I have talked a little bit about, what to look for, informed by a lot of Internicola blog posts that you've published on your website that's super helpful as a resource. If you don't engage in any other way, oh my gosh, the resources you guys have on your website are especially helpful, and may have made it into some presentations of mine. I'm not sure, but
Nobody's looking.
Right, cited correctly. That's also probably not true, but anyway. So as we've done this, we realized, hey, let's go to the source here and see if we can't talk to who we talk to about our questions around the FDD. And Brian, I just can't wait to get into it with you today.
Great. Happy to give any information I can.
Perfect. Well, I want to frame this here for us all. Right? Let's say that a nice candidate from a great market has been talking to some guy from Nebraska about some home care franchise. And the next thing that guy from Nebraska tells this nice candidate is they're going to get an FDD. The guy's been nice to our candidates so far, and he says, okay, fine, send it on over. The second candidate opens up their email. They see a 300-page document, right?
Yeah.
I can imagine in that moment, there's some words that are said that we won't repeat today. But the questions begin to maybe roll out. Then they might sound like this. What is this thing, right? Why am I being sent this? And let's say we read a little bit of it and we start to say, do I have any say in this, right? Can I change this? Can I make a negotiation to this document, whatever this is? And then finally, how do I sift through this? What am I looking for? What are some really impactful places of this document I ought to skip to first before I just plow through 300 pages of legalese, right? This is what I'm seeing here so far and what we address here at A Place at Home, but I'd like to get your take on some of these things. Okay, so let's start at the top. Right, I've just ruined this person's world with a big old FDD, but I'm trying to save face, and the first thing I can do is just explain what is happening, right? But Brian, can you explain it to me, right? When we get this, when we're asking ourselves, can you answer it here? What is a franchise disclosure document?
So essentially, a franchise disclosure document, or FDD, as it's called commonly, is all it is a packet of information. That's really all when you boil it all down, that's all it is. It's information that's required to be disclosed by a franchise system when they're trying to sell a franchise. Now, to fully understand why the FDD exists, it's good to kind of give some history to it. So around the 1960s, 1970s, a lot of franchise systems were becoming popular, like the older original versions of the franchises out there. Some of them are still around, some of them aren't, but franchising became a popular model. So what was happening was a lot of the franchise systems were making promises
Mhm.
and certain providing certain information to prospective franchisees that may not have been true.
Mm.
So to combat this, really it started in California. California started the first requirement as far as giving information to prospective franchisees
Mhm.
about the franchise offering. And
Yeah.
then over time, over the next, really in the 1970s, became very popular.
Mhm.
The Federal Trade Commission, which is the current body that governs it,
Mhm.
came out with federal rules to say if you're going to sell a franchise in the US, you have to comply with these rules. And
Mhm.
part of those rules are providing information that a prospective franchisee needs gets time to review
Mhm.
before they make a purchase, before they sign an agreement or give a check over, hand a check
Mhm.
over to the franchise system. And it was really just intended to combat fraud that was happening, that was coming about because of the not so forthright salespeople. Uh,
Mhm.
Not saying you're not forthright.
Right,
I'm,
right, right,
right.
right, right, right. Now this part is recorded, so
Yeah.
I'll give you $100 later. Thank you.
But that's really what was happening. So so that's really the foundation of it. And
Mm.
it what they wound up prescribing was it used to be called the Uniform Franchise Offering Circular, UFOC, before it was an FDD.
Mhm.
And they really wanted to give prospective franchisees the ability to compare different systems along the same lines, right? So now,
Mm.
if you look at an FDD, you see item one. Item
Mhm.
one in every single FDD covers the same exact thing. So whether we're looking at a place at home, whether we're looking at a McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, whatever it is,
Mhm.
item one is gonna provide the exact information, about the corporate, history, the corporate structure of the system,
Mhm.
industry specific laws, right? So now if I'm a prospective franchisee, I'm comparing three different systems. I can always, and I want information, I can compare it item one to item one to item one, and it
Mhm.
gives me the same information throughout
Mhm.
the three systems. So it's a
Yeah.
uniform way of reviewing a franchise offering, and it's they intended it that way to make it easier for prospective franchisees to comb through a lot of the information, as you're saying.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, it sounds like too that in this time of huge popularity in the 60s and 70s, the industry just blows up so much that you have more than one thing to look at, right? There's a lot of stuff, and if you're hearing one deal from this person and a completely different thing from somebody else, you ought to be given the space to really vet that and perform your own due diligence in a way that isn't like finding needles and haystacks out here, right? Can
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
UFOC, right, kind of puts this uniform, right, way to see these franchises on paper, right? Was there a considerable difference in that document when it became rebranded or named as the FDD, or was that more of a formality?
It's a good question. There were some additional. It was kind of updated. Everything was
Okay.
updated, but for the most part, everything in the current FDD is very similar to what it was in the UFOC,
Hmm.
and that was up 2008. They updated, so it was just basic updates, and it got stale at that point.
Hmm.
But for all intents and purposes, the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And if we're talking about 10-year terms, which as you're reviewing FDDs with your brands, it's likely what it is. Not always, but it could very well be that there might not be any more UFOCs that spawn franchise agreements signed anymore. We're maybe out of that, unless you're dealing with a 15-year term and you're probably a renewal,
Yeah.
or something like that. Yeah. And I always like to bring up too when you're saying this that this is not just us coming out of the goodness of our hearts saying this is the information. The FTC comes in and says we're the Federal Trade Commission. This is something we're going to do to protect buyers, right? Not only are we going to make this framework that everybody must subscribe to and put information for, the FTC will mandate the first couple pages in every FDD, right? And this is something I learned from our great partners in Internicola, the FTC page, right? That's number one. That's just the quick, uh, I don't want to miscategorize research papers and some of the abstracts or just the white paper that is before the broader research. But that's kind of what it feels like. This franchise offers these kinds of services for this general amount that gets paid to these people, right? There it is. If you
Yep.
just need to see something, if you read the first page, you're doing pretty good, right? But what's helpful there is kind of as a backbone of what you and I are talking about today. The next page, the next thing you read is also a uniform series of questions that look very much like a frequently asked questions page on any brand's website now, right? What is this going to cost me? You ought to find this information in these areas. It's just a table like that. So if you've found yourself through probably 3 cups of coffee dealing on these 2 pages, trying to figure this all out, you're getting at least some pretty solid roadmaps as to where you're going to go within this document, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that the FDD attempts to do, there's a term, in plain English, right? They it's written mostly by lawyers, but they want to make it so any prospective franchisee who's not a lawyer can understand it. So the first few designated disclosures really try to, like you're saying, it's a frequently asked questions. What does this mean? It has to be in a certain font size, and it has to be in your face. There's also a special risk section. If certain things are if you have a short operating history or you don't have a registered trademark, you have to call out those things up front because they know that people don't make it to page 100 that often. So they said you got to put these things up front, and make it really make a prospective franchisee aware that they exist up front. So.
Yeah, and put it in the cliff notes in the short version, right? 5 or fewer. You got to get that many pages in front of folks,
right?
So that is something I've really tried to share with our candidates too, that we learned from Internicola. It's right there, right? That's the stuff that the FTC said we have to, really set up some guardrails here. These are the first 5 pages of things you ought to see, right? Which to me is huge, right? But it's funny you mentioned page 100, right? I have a follow-up question to this, because let's say you're a madman and you do get to page 100, right? That packet of information starts to show you different things, different smaller packets within it, right? And so when we talk about FDDs all the time, sometimes you can interchange the term a franchise agreement when you're talking about this. That may not be accurate. Can you tell me what the difference is between a franchise disclosure document and a franchise agreement?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So the FDD, the packet, the 300 pages, has different exhibits in that FDD. So part of the disclosure, as far as the government's concerned, is we're going to give you the information, right? So that's the disclosure portion of it. We're also going to give you the information, anything that you're going to sign as part of the relationship should be disclosed up front, right? So that's the franchise agreement, confidentiality agreement, personal guarantees, assignment of digital rights, lease riders, anything that you would potentially sign as part of it is in the FDD. So the franchise agreement is the legally binding document that eventually a prospect will sign if they decide to move forward. What the one in the FDD though is blank. It doesn't have the names. It's the form before the actual specific information is filled in. Once the information is known, right? Mr. and Mrs. Jones, they want to move forward. Then Mr. and Mrs. Jones's name is inserted, their address, the territory potentially, things like that, where we're going to fill in the blanks with the information for the prospect. But so this gives the franchisee the ability to see not only the information, the background information in the FDD, but also, what am I going to be bound by? That's going to be the legal document that I'm going to have to sign. So I want to know that in advance before I make a decision of whether or not I want to move forward.
Oh, that's huge, right? And what sticks out to me is like, as far as the government's concerned, that's almost like a trigger for me. I'm like, okay, antennas are up. What are they concerned about, right? It's everything you ought to know and everything you ought to sign, right? There it is. If you're going to do this, this is the information that you have to be aware of, because it can influence your decision, right? Or you at least need to be aware of what's in the FDD. Then we're also going to give you like a template blank look as to every document that we will eventually ask you to sign. Right?
Correct. And also, part of the laws also mandates that a prospect can't sign on the day they receive the FDD.
Hmm.
right? So they have a cooling off period for 14 days. It's a 14-day period where so it gives the government wants to give the prospect some time to review all the information,
Hmm.
maybe speak to an attorney, speak to an accountant, financial advisor, lender, whatever the case is. So it gives them that time to do that and process that information.
Yeah, absolutely. If I was, shopping on my phone and every time I went to go buy, something, and then all of a sudden it said, "Hey, wait 2 weeks, and then you can come back and buy this," right? I think I'd have a lot fewer shoes. That's for sure. But my shoes don't cost $200,000, not all the time, or
Right.
something like that, right? It was really helpful to have that. And I want to get back to outside counsel as well. Like that's something there, but. Uh, when we're this cooling off period, we may start seeing some things and we may start asking some questions, right? As it should. That's what it's designed to do, is to give you that amount of time to really absorb it and either seek counsel, talk to other people, maybe send some things back to the franchisor, have that kind of conversation there, right? If I'm the candidate here, this seems like a great opportunity to get some more information here. I've heard from some of my brand partners, out in the world too, that maybe that conversation is best had outside of the relationship between franchisor or brand to the candidate, right? They don't necessarily want to talk about it. Hey, we already had to write all this stuff down. Why are you making me say it twice? Like, or something like that, right? Is that an okay course of action, or is that a missed opportunity? How do you feel about franchisors communicating to the candidate about what they put in the FDD?
You know what? I think there's no such thing as bad information, right? The more information you get, the better.
Hmm,
I don't think it replaces the need to get a franchise attorney to
gotcha.
review it or a professional accountant. I don't think it replaces it. I think it just supplements,
Hmm.
supplements that. So I wouldn't say just speak to the franchisor and that's it.
Hmm.
You still have to get your professionals to kind of get their opinion on it and
Hmm.
do that due diligence completely. But I like
Hmm.
when a franchisor goes through it, kind of gives some background, shed some light on certain things.
Hmm.
I think it's a worthwhile time. There are brands out there that you're right, say, you know what, speak to your lawyer or speak to your accountant. I don't want to deal with this. And this is, but to me, it's never bad to get information. That's
Hmm.
my thought on it.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's just it seems like it adds some credibility, to what we're trying to get across to candidates who are really interested in this, right? And again, there's a lot of opinions on that, and I like how you say too. It's not which avenue are you going to pursue, right? It's pursue all of them, get all the information that you can, make sure that you've invested in yourself as a candidate to have the bandwidth to do so. It will all serve you very well, right? Um, and that to me is huge. So you mentioned outside attorneys, right? Kind of looking at this, accountants as well, who are considering whether or not to let you take your rollover funds and start something like this, right? Um, but attorneys themselves are especially helpful in seeing this, right? What would you say am I asking for if I have an FDD and an agreement and I'm going to an attorney? What am I trying to get from them as far as like walking through this document?
Well, one thing I would say is you probably want to go to a franchise specific lawyer, someone who understands franchising, because
Mm,
it's been my experience, if you have a real estate attorney who tries to look at this, they don't really understand the FDD, the
mm,
disclosure process, the franchise agreements. Their knowledge of it is limited, whereas
mm,
a franchise specific attorney understands, the process and what's going on.
mm,
So that's the first thing. Two, the way I always think about it is, a franchisee attorney's job is more about education. Generally speaking, we consider the franchise agreement to be not changeable, right? It's
mm,
not. It's much different than a relationship if you're signing a lease, where we go into the relationship and say, okay, we're going to try to change all the information we can, to benefit us as the tenant, and we
mhm,
redline the agreement and kind of go from there. In the
mhm,
franchise world, whatever agreement you sign or whatever terms you get it's kind of attached to the entire system.
Mm.
Right. So if you think about it, a big thing for franchisors and a franchise system is consistency. That's probably one of the benefits of a franchise system. So now think about having a 100-unit system and having all different terms and all different agreements, right? Royalties are monthly for one, royalties are weekly for others. Royalties are different percentages for each one, right? It creates an administrative nightmare for a franchise system and kind of ruins the whole idea of being consistent and efficient. So that's a big part of it. It's also, when you think about it, not fair. It's where, and I think about like an annual conference where two franchisees are talking to each other. One franchisee signed in 2020, and then the franchisee that signed in 2022 has a lower royalty than the one, who signed in 2020. It's kind of it's not fair to that, initial franchisee, the older franchisee. So to me, there are some laws against treating franchisees disparately and things like that. But for me, aside from that, to me, it's not fair, right? It's not fair to deviate from one franchisee to the other. And I think it kind of, creates animosity, and that's probably the thing that's more likely to implode a franchise system is to have internal dissension with franchisees, and it kind of, goes bad from there. So to me, it's almost, if I'm representing a franchisee, I ask for 20 changes and a franchisor makes them all. To me, that's a bigger red flag than anything else, right? Honestly, because that's going to be more likely to bankrupt the system than anything else. So
exactly, and that's huge, right? So there's so much there that I think is helpful for people coming into, what they might perceive as a high stakes conversation, right? They're about to sign a document that's got, 6, maybe even 7 figures attached to it, as far as if they were to actually buy this thing or be awarded into that system. They're speaking with attorneys, their accountants are on board, all of this sort of stuff, right? And one thing I want to add to this is, what's your end goal as this individual, right? There could be a lot of exits that you wish to have. Let's just talk about someone buying your business from you, right? What if that's what I wanted out of this thing that, me and Brian Lincer, we start over here. We got this nice franchise. We're really excited about it. But, we're in it to provide for our families too, right? So what we expect is that by the end of the term or somewhere thereabouts, right, we have a business that's valuable, that somebody wants to buy, right? And that can continue to live on throughout our experience, right? When we get to that time and we found this person wants to buy it, right, and they realize that our agreement is wildly different than the next location, that location's is wildly different from theirs, they realize that this system is based on a lot of kind of patchwork agreements between a lot of people over several years. They may be less inclined to come and buy that business from us, right? It seems like it's just not part of a system. It's not unique. What they're taking over is a little slice of the Wild West over here, right? And now this thing that I, talked Brian into, because he kept telling me no for years, and finally we did. I'm saying we're going to get, an opportunity to sell us at the end, and that buyer walks away because of this, right? That hurts my value at the end of a business that I put 10 years into. That is the college fund I very much need to work out, by the end of that, because it's just happening dozens of times with my other franchisees, right? It scares me to think of what that could look like for a lot of folks who see those kinds of patchworks.
Yeah, the funny thing is, it happens a lot for newer systems where they're kind of learning it. Learning the process, and don't realize the ramifications of making those radical changes.
Right.
But usually after the first couple of years, they figure it out. So a lot of time, and then they kind of have to go through the process of weeding it out of the system. It's unfortunate, and we always tell people, try to be as consistent as possible. Are there situations where there are some minor modifications that can be made? That's a possibility, right? But to me, it's 99% education, right? That the franchisee's attorney's job is to describe what happens if a franchisee wants to sell their business. and then talk about, okay, there's a transfer fee. There's, the new buyer has to be approved by the franchisor. They may have to sign a new franchise agreement under the then current terms, right? And providing that information so the franchisee is making a fully informed decision. To me, that's job number one, and that's really what they should focus on. And then if there are some things, unique situations that may not be material, there are, you have conversations about it. But my recommendation typically is, limit changes. Don't make, because it actually winds up hurting, even in that scenario that you mentioned, where a franchisee wants to make sure they have value on their exit of the if they want to sell the franchise. If you have an imploding franchise system, no one's going to buy it, right?
Right.
So when franchising works, it really works well for both the franchisee and the franchisor. And that's really, and it's the same principle. So you're not only protecting the franchise system, but you're protecting the franchisees at the same time as on a whole. So you're not really getting much of a benefit when you make those radical changes or material changes.
Right. So what I'm hearing so far is like, look, what needs to happen here is pay good money to talk with a franchise specific attorney to gain some education you didn't have before, and just some really well-rounded ideas of what it's going to be like for you and your family to sign this thing in front of you. Right?
Absolutely. That's really the key.
Boom. Can you live with that? Is that something that works? Does that get you closer to the goals that you started this whole journey to get to? If so, great. You've done some pretty good due diligence, and there's likely still steps ahead of you by the time that you've had that conversation with people around you. But that's where we need to go here. And that's some really great value. What we as brands and what you guys as franchise attorneys help us all get to is that moment where you have enough information here to not, be looking at some chicken or burger restaurant in the 60s and getting a million promises or whatever it is. It's a real concrete offering of an investment that gets you a pretty good understanding of what it would be like should you move forward, right?
Absolutely.
Love that. So that we're trying to make it better for everybody over here. We're getting clearer. It's all truth now, generally speaking. We're at least closer to what you would need to know to make an investment. That said, there's still a bunch of information to figure out, right? So if I'm getting this FDD and I understand, as a candidate, right, I'm getting talked to by this guy in Nebraska and he seems nice, but I still have this thing to do, right? And I start opening it up. What might you suggest to me? Where should I go? Or is there some key items within the FDD that I ought to look at first? What do you think about that?
There's a few different sections. It's kind of broken up into the item numbers, right? That's how they're referenced in the law. Where, so generally speaking, items, let's say 1 through 4 are background information on the franchise system. So we want to take a look at item 3, which is the litigation, right? Make sure that there's not a pattern of litigation, right? Litigation happens in any business. Things happen in life. So it's not like it's not always 100% clean, but what we're looking for are patterns, right? Do they have a consistent pattern where franchisees are suing franchisor is suing franchisee, that we can kind of anticipate and use that as our predictor for the future, right? If we wanted to. Same thing with item 4, which is bankruptcies. And that goes along with any bankruptcies of any management team members or any organizations, corporations, LLCs that are connected to the franchisor in any way, right? So that's important. That gives kind of like background information as you would, do background check on an employee, right? So those are important. Next, you get to the financial aspects, items 5, 6, 7, and 8. So item 5, important. These are the upfront fees, right? The initial franchise fee. Sometimes there's training fees. Sometimes there's software fees. Sometimes there's, initial inventory. So these are the upfront fees that you're going to pay to the franchisor. Item 6, really important. These are the continuing fees, right? We want to see what the royalty is, what the marketing is, what the local marketing requirements are, technology fees, right? So those are all the continuing fees that during the relationship. And then item 7, really important. How much is it going to cost me to get in? I'm going to make that initial investment, as far as that includes the franchise fee, but also includes build out for the lease, insurance, any equipment. Do I need a service vehicle? Right, those types of things. So I know what to anticipate, what my investment's going to be in that. Then you know, kind of in between, like I would say items 8 and item to 18, less important information. Still got to read it, but then you skip down to item 19. This is probably one of the most important. This is the financial data of the company locations and any franchise locations, if they are able to disclose information or they choose to disclose information. You know, so item 19 is discretionary. Not every system has an item 19. It's the one area that you don't have to include if you don't want to. But if it is in there, you want to see what others, businesses in the system are doing, whether it be corporate owned, franchisee owned, and you kind of use that as a baseline for what you anticipate. Because the biggest factor probably is how much money can I make, and that answers or attempts to answer that question to a certain degree. Then you have item 20. How many units have they signed on in the last 3 years? How many people have left the system? Really the way I look at it is a pattern, right? There, things happen, COVID happens, right? Where people exited systems and there was a big number there. And that's not unusual to see something like that. But I'd want to see a kind of a slow growth pattern where, the system's, on a good trajectory. It's not growing too fast, because that could be a problem too, right? If I see they sold 100 units last year, that could be a potential, red flag, because how are they going to support that? At the same time, if 100 units left the system last year, that could be a problem too. What is that? Where did that come from? And I'd want to get more information there. The only other thing I would say is, important is, the list of franchisees kind of goes along the same lines. So every FDD has a list of franchisees, their contact information, and a big part of due diligence is contacting franchisees and seeing what, the FDD only discloses things on paper, but getting it directly from, existing franchisees, that really helps substantiate a lot of the information that's in there, and really helps kind of, you gain a lot of insight through that. And not only do you gain insight as to whether or not I should sign a franchise agreement or not, but I love to hear things like, I spoke to this franchisee, they told me to hire a manager on day one and not wait, because that's when their business excelled. Or I didn't need such a big office. I should have started with a smaller office. So now that learning is now passed on to the new franchisee from the existing franchisee, and that helps, increase the probability of success. So I love taking those nuggets of information and utilizing that for yourself. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think that's the big hitter, right? Is making sure that you have a way within the document to get to people who are living it, right? What is their lived experience? What might they share with you about what it's been like for them, right? And how can you benefit there, right? How can you take that information and build a strong business that will ultimately help the person on the other end of the phone too, and everybody wins, especially your end users, whoever's using your product, right? And you're right, it's all there toward the end of your item list, 23 in total, right? But it's toward the end there, and you'll be able to see all of that. So
yeah,
I like it.
And when franchising works, it works for everybody, right? The other franchisees help other franchisees, which help franchisor help, right? It's like a communal, process, which really, to me, it's amazing. I love being a part of it. I'm like blessed to be, to have people like you and Dustin and Jared and client, all our clients, like they're entrepreneurs, they're people that care. And I don't think you find an other industry that's like this, where competitors help each other. It's a really, it's a great community, and, I'm blessed to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, well, I tell you what, anytime I get to talk to you, I feel blessed, right? Yeah, and especially about this. And I hope that all of our viewers here joining the live broadcast today got a lot of value out of this. Maybe you're sitting on 2 or 3 FDDs and you don't know what to do. And then Brian and Mitch, we're going to set you straight. We'll help you out through it. Okay. Well, we'll get through it. But who knows? Maybe you want to see our FDD. Well, maybe you want to talk to me. I don't know. I'm here on LinkedIn. Let me know. Right. And if I don't know the answer, I'm going to go ask Brian. So it's going to be that. But we appreciate it. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us here this week. This was great. On a stop of your speaking tour this week, getting to the digital community. So thank you for doing that. And I tell you what, all of our viewers here joining us every week, I want to make a special note. Let's give some roadmaps here. We have a holiday weekend coming up, so A Place at Home is going to be off next week. Right, we're not broadcasting next week so that we can catch up from that holiday weekend. And that's all I'll say about that. But no, and we'll be right back at it, talking in about 2 weeks. We're excited to bring you some more content there. And for folks who are here on the live, you can of course see this every Tuesday. But should you enjoy coming back to this information after the fact, all of this information goes to YouTube, where you'll be able to find this information with us. You also just might look up a little bit of Internicola. You can find some wonderful information about everybody in this organization. Mr. Internicola himself, right, making a lot of videos in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of information just like this. If you're interested in learning more and getting to be a part of this industry, we want you. We want you to know what we know, and we're getting it through channels just like this. So with that, thank you for joining us, and a final thank you to Mr. Brian Lincer.
Mitch, thank you so much. Pleasure as always.
Absolutely. Well, I'll see you soon. All right.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Later, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.